Yeah, as you can see here, originally from Brazil, like Peter was saying, and I'm living in Australia for the last 14 years and become Australia, have Australian daughter, and my wife, myself, and a daughter. And funny, that logo here, that's my community logo, was done by my daughter, 11 years old. And yeah, I work for Microsoft as open source consultant and have been in technology for the last 20 years, you know, probably 7 years in Brazil and 14 years here in Australia. Come from the development background, and I do a lot of DevOps. And I started doing containers and Kubernetes, I think, from the beginning, 2014. And, you know, like I say, we start to discuss these basic things, and maybe I can bring some, you know, things that we used to discuss 2 or 3 years ago, and looks like that we are thinking that everybody knows everything, but we, you know, we have to, I think, go back in for the basics sometimes, and I think that's the whole idea. Let me open my camera here as well. I'm here at home, and I think the whole idea, Pete, is, you know, the way that we do development and the way that we, you know, work with what we call cloud native is a big change for the developers and for the admin people as well. And that's take longer, you know, to get adoption than, you know, we thought before. I think he's starting growing very fast last 3 years, since like mid 2017. And last year was really, really fast, you know, the movement to, you know, AKS, containers and Kubernetes. And Kubernetes become, you know, that main thing. And that's what I'm doing. I'm a guy that doing development. I used to be Microsoft MVP for 2 or 3 years. And then I joined Microsoft. I'm really missing the MVP community. And used to meet the guys every year. And but I'm here. I'm still that MVP community person here. And I like to share, you know, what I'm learning. And that's the whole idea here. I did like a Windows containers meetup last week, and that's who I am, you know. And I'm going to share this new thing I'm doing. That's the Azula community. It's not just for me, it's just for anyone that want to share content. Please join us. And I'm recording with Docker captains, you know, CNCF ambassadors, and there's a lot of content there. And by the way, in English and Portuguese as well. And if anyone from Brazil or from Portugal or from any Portuguese community, there's a lot of content in Portuguese there. Then I'm happy to, you know, to record and to onboard anyone as a mentor. That's all like about a tarball or a zip file for Azure. And there's a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Azuretar. It's pretty much what I'm doing, Pete. And at Microsoft, enjoying March last year, and I'm doing a lot of, you know, very nice projects at Microsoft Consulting Service. I'm really enjoying work for Microsoft.
If you're doing a lot of Kubernetes, you're really right in the middle of one of the hottest topics in the world of technology. And Microsoft hired the inventor of Kubernetes, right? So
that's
I feel
correct.
like you have the knowledge base.
Yeah, Brendan Burns came to Microsoft 2016, I think, and I met him here. He came here in Australia 2017 for Container Camp. I was speaking there as well. It was very good. You know, he visited customers, and since then, since 2017, you know, with the Days acquisition, we bring together products like Helm, and the team that came in from Days acquisition pretty much was the team that built AKS. You know, Gabe Monroy and Lockheed, that's Aussie. And yeah, we have Aussie people there as well on the team. And it's very good to see, you know, this growing last 3 years. And Azure Arc come from the same thing, pretty much from Gabe Monroy and the team. And now we all like a big team, but was looks like a long time, but just like 2 or 3 years. A lot of things has been done in the last 3 years. ACI, Azure Container Instance, AKS, Codespace used to be called another environment, Connect Environments, but we changed the name last minute. Then I did, like as MVP, I did private preview for all those things last 3 or 4 years. And it's very nice to be at Microsoft now, working and helping customers to, and Windows containers, I think, is a big one. I can even show something about Windows container here as well. But let's see, I like to do try to do a hands-on and see how my local computer handles all these demos, but I like to show things running. It fails, but at least you have the idea how that, works in real life.
We will grant you some leniency if the demo gods don't cooperate. That happens, man.
Yeah, I tried to install something last night and I crashed my environment and it took me 2 hours to fix, but that's the, developer one. We're always trying to stretch the edge, and do something more, but it's very nice. I'm trying to do like 3 or 4 different things at the same time, but that's normal. Normally I develop, pick one solution and go for it, but when you are play and testing and promoting, you have to go across all of these technologies and try to find what the best fit for the customers. And
that's a big job. You're gonna be busy for a while.
yeah, it looks like an endless job. Yeah. We try and keeping every week. And funny thing, we have a new version of Windows Terminal overnight. We have a new version of Windows Admin Center yesterday as well. There's a lot of other things as well released because MS Ready is happening this week as well. Inspire and Ready for the partners and the internal conference, and there's a lot of things being released. And I just updated a couple of things last night, to be honest. And then, guys, maybe you're going to see very fresh content. And yeah, do you want me to go forward? What do you want to do?
Do it. We're ready. Let us have it.
Okay, let's do it. Yep, the whole idea here is to talk about setting up your local Kubernetes environment. And I don't know if anyone that started like 3 years ago, they probably remember that the discussion was how can I debug, how can I run things locally? You don't use to create like a local Kubernetes was pretty heavy. You have to create VMs. They create something called Minikube that was the local thing. And the whole idea of the talk is how we can use now what's, the fresh, guys on the shelf that we can pick and use for local Kubernetes, development, environment, administration. And my name is Jorge Arteiro from Australia, a Microsoft open source consultant. Those are my contacts. You can probably find on Twitter. And I've done all these things. As we just discussed now about, I'm used to be MVP, and that helped me a lot, to learn how to share content. And the whole idea of those conferences to share content with people. And my background here is about Linux. I used to be a Linux guy on 20 years ago, 18 years ago, when beginning of Linux. So in Brazil, Linux is very, very strong. And my career in Brazil was a lot of multi-platform development with C++ and things in Linux, and was like Ball and Delph, then coming C# in 2001 too. And I follow all these changes, and very lucky to be from that generation, to be honest. What I'm doing at the moment is let me open probably be better to share like that. I have a community site called Azureta, at Azureta Twitter. Azul and Ta, in Portuguese, Azureta means make noise, okay? But For us here, Azure will be Azul and like a tar ball. In Linux, tar is a tar file, is a zip file. And ping me here if you wanna, collaborate, share. Then youtube.com/Azure. There's a lot of videos there. I think 33 videos in 2 months. Speed is amazing. It wasn't just my work. Fernando Ronick, Nuno here as well, and Fernando. There are Raul from Sydney. We have blog posts as well. There are people from China. There's a lot of people helping, and I'm happy to onboard anyone that want to be part of that, be a mentor. And I want to start doing, go back and see what's Kubernetes. Why people using a container cluster. And that's how we manage, Kubernetes on Azure. It's a product that we call AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service. Used to be Azure Container Service 3 years ago, that you could use multiple products. Now we have just focus on Kubernetes, and that's the de facto, container orchestrator. And what's a container orchestrator? Okay, containers are, at least you have to understand what's a container. You can sandbox your environment inside a container. It's not a virtual machine. It's a process isolation done on top of your kernel. Could be Linux, could be Windows. And you bring like a process isolation where isolate by namespace. You can isolate network. You can isolate storage. And that's what that little container here, we're talking about Docker containers. And Docker was the company that got that, let's say, that feature from Linux. Used to be only Linux 5 years ago. Then like in 2015, Microsoft started building this capability inside the Windows Server as well. And now we have even on Windows 10. And the Docker was the company that say, okay, let's make that easier. Okay, it was on the operating system. You could isolate process, but Docker create the tools and the CLI, a command line tools to simplify that. And that's why we say Docker containers all the time. But that most of what Docker did was open source, and it's part of the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, CNCF. And starting from that little container here that we had, someone there was a guy, Brendan Burns, used to work for Google at the time, and all the guys at Google said, hang on, they went for a Docker meetup and they saw that container thing and they said, we need something on top of the container to orchestrate that. Okay, I don't want to run one container. I want to run, 100 containers in load balancer on top, and manage that thing. And they start building things inside, and that's what become, at the end of the day, Kubernetes. And Brendan Burns worked for Microsoft since 2016, and all these AKS, everything was done by his team. And that's very good for Microsoft to have, the founder of Kubernetes and one of the creators working for them. And the other two now work for VMware. And what they did, they create what they starting, with Docker and the community had a few other companies, IBM, Microsoft, working together, and they starting separating the layers and open source that. And the container runtime is one thing called container D. We're going to see, could be Docker, but they start breaking those components. Okay, they create one, there's a kubelet that runs inside a node like a VM. Then at the end of the day, a Kubernetes cluster is nothing more than a bunch of VMs, because we don't have too much bare metal on public cloud. We pretty much talk about VMs, but could be a bare metal. And I have those VMs where you install that kubelet. Could be, normally it's a Linux VM or a Windows VM, depending of, you can have both. And you install that kubelet, and those what we call the worker nodes. Okay, the agent nodes, the worker nodes. And the control plane, we have to also have a control plane to manage those nodes. And we used to call, master, but let's say control plane nodes. I think the more polite way to say now, let's stop say master now. Maybe I have to update my presentation. But that control plane here is not just one node, okay? It'll be multiple nodes, it'll be a cluster of masters where you also break the components. Those are Kubernetes components like API server, scheduler, controller manager in like a database using etcd open source like key value database. And how that works, I want to run something on that cluster, okay? Kubernetes look for those nodes. Okay, I can have like 2 nodes here, like 2 VMs. For Kubernetes, that's like a big VM. If I have like 2 CPU and 4 gig of memory for each node, doesn't matter for Kubernetes. They look at that as a big machine where they have that resource to allocate applications, to deploy applications. And someone just called that API, then a lot of people say that Kubernetes is just API. It is. You call that API, JSON API, you call that API, they're going to translate that and schedule these to run somewhere. They talk with this kubelet on each node. They ask the kubelet, do you have space to run like a 500 megabytes API? Yes. Then I go and the kubelet is going to run called like Docker or container D to run your container. And the kube proxy is going to do all the routing, all the magic with IP tables on Linux and different ways on Windows nodes. And the magic works. If anyone that used to be web farm, many years ago with IIS knows that these take ages. This can take really long time to create a cluster, and we used to create weeks to do that. We can create now in 5 or 10 minutes and have all this cluster working with how many nodes you want, and you can scale your application. And that's how Kubernetes, start doing the magic. When I'm talking AKS, I'm explaining Kubernetes, okay? I'm explaining using AKS on Kubernetes service, but Azure service, but that's pretty much the same for any Kubernetes service, including your local one. And then on Azure, you can even attach, disks, Azure files in your containers. You can connect your cluster, your nodes on your Azure VNet. And you can also use in load balancers. You're going to see that I have a slide here. You're going to see you can connect load balancers on your service. Say, I want to deploy my API, but I want a 5 instance of this API. I want to put a load balancer. I want to expose that as a public IP. I want to get my DNS, set my DNS and point for that IP, for that load balancer, and all the traffic is going to flow on my containers instance. Okay, and that's very easy to do things like blue-green deployments. You're going to see that Kubernetes has one thing called deployment, where we can just say, can you create a new version? When that version is ready, just stop my V1 and move all the traffic to V2, and that's done all by Kubernetes deployment. Okay, but the nice thing is Kubernetes is a full service on Azure. Like you can use any, you can put this inside a VNet, use the storage, and pretty much connect with anything on Azure. You can use private endpoints to talk with SQL Server, with any database, with any service, then because you're inside the VNet. But I want to go back a little bit for the containers. I was talking at the beginning that people forget about what container is. When Microsoft started Windows containers in 2015, and was all about doing the same thing that they have available on Linux, bringing to Windows. And Microsoft was the first one to create one thing called HyperV Containers. HyperV Containers is something that nobody was doing in 2015. And now we have Kata containers, other type of isolation, but the initial Docker idea was there is a kernel. Okay, the containers that you create, they're all going to share the same kernel. When you create a new container, you can have multiple containers. They all share the same kernel. And you have these, host modes that manage, that'll be the Docker engine or containerd now, that container host service. It's all open source, by the way. Microsoft has a lot of open source projects. Those things that manage these things are mostly open source. But they share the same kernel. Then Microsoft said, hang on, we need some kind of extra layer of virtualization for security reasons, and they create HyperV containers. But it's not a full HyperV, virtual machine. It's a very lightweight, just isolation around the container, and they manage all the communication between the container, the host and the virtual machine in between. It's very, very lightweight. You can create in seconds and milliseconds sometimes. 2 or 3 seconds, you can create a container. And now I have these two flavors, Windows containers and HyperV containers, Windows Server containers. And that's the difference to native Linux containers, okay? Linux containers, they all, they're born like that, Linux kernel. Docker create this Docker daemon that's like the background running. And they separate in containerd. That's the part that was open source by Docker, containerd. That's part of CNCF, Cloud Computing Foundation and Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And runc is the runtime. Okay, containerd is like a library. Runc is the runtime that creates the container inside like a operating system Linux kernel namespace using different kernel features. And if you step a little bit, Microsoft has attempts to run Linux containers inside Windows as well. That's what we call LCAL, or Linux containers on Windows, where because we have this Hyper-V VM, we said, okay, it's a utility VM. We can run Hyper-V containers, but we can run Linux kernel there as well. Okay, because if I go back here, that's Hyper-V containers. You see they have another kernel here. They have one specific kernel. The same thing here. Okay, let's put the Linux kernel. Then we have what we call Linux containers on Windows. Yes, you can run like Nginx, reverse proxy on Windows. We still have, going to have, I think, LCAL v2 in some stage, not really 100% production ready, but it's something that you can run the same way. And that's the technology, why I like to show this. Because of this technology here, we create Windows Subsystem for Linux version 2. That's what now the mainstream, and all using that technology here. Okay, but nice thing today is that you can use Kubernetes with on Azure with Linux and Windows, and you can have what we call node pools. You can have agents and VMs with Linux pools and Windows pools. And the control plane is pretty much blue blocks there that you don't have to care. It's fully managed by by Microsoft. How we do that locally? How we go back for the local thing? Things like that we can do on cloud very easy. We can put a load balancer in front of our application, and you can access the pools. How can you do that? That's how Kubernetes works. We discussed before. Okay. I think the first thing before I go to try to show some demos and show the environment running and how this thing works is understand the workflow. Your workflow for Kubernetes, you have your source code, say a Git repo, GitHub, Azure DevOps, whatever you have your code. What do? You normally have to build what we call is a container image. Okay, now is a OCI open container image. Docker file became the standard to define that image. Then you normally run a Docker build. Now you have a product called build kit that's open source as well. Then you don't even need Docker to build the image. There's another project called build kit, and that's just getting the version for Windows containers, but you can build with Docker, can build Windows and Linux containers. With build kit, you can build Linux, and Windows is pretty much coming very soon. And then it kind of fully open source. There is no dependence on Docker in some stage, but let's recognize that Docker is the company that creates the whole thing in open source. Once you build that image, you have to save that somewhere, okay? I have my application where I package it. The Docker image is like a package for my application where I have all these like layers. You can put layers. So my API, I have the base image. I put like a, in Linux, so you can have like a, you're going to merge layers of file system, and that's how you create a Docker image. And the container registry that we call Docker registry, Docker Hub, or Azure Container Registry is just a way to keep your package somewhere, like JFrog Artifactory can have the same. You keep your artifacts there, and Docker image become like a artifact. That's my application. I package all my dependence there. I don't depend on the dependence of my local host. It's all packaged inside this Docker image. I save that somewhere, and now I get my deployment, CI/CD tools. Could be Azure DevOps, could be anything, and I can use those, command lines or tools to deploy on Kubernetes, on Docker, or even any other, container orchestrator. Like OpenShift, you have OpenShift on Azure as well. And Helm is Microsoft now, was coming from a company called Days that Microsoft acquired in 2017. Is a package manager for Kubernetes. Okay, it's a simple way to you to write the YAML files required by Kubernetes when you call that API. When you call, if you go back here, when you call this API, we have to pass, a manifesto that's called using a YAML file. And Helm was created to simplify and, print template on top of this YAML file that could be very complex sometimes, and to try, create like a template language on top of that. And then Helm was created and simplifies a lot of things. Let's see how we on time. And going back now for local Kubernetes, what we have, do we need to create a cluster, a AKS cluster to work with Kubernetes on my machine? I want to work just like remote, locally here, offline, completely offline. I haven't put Minikube here, but there's another one called Minikube. There is different flavors. You can use Docker Desktop. Okay, you can use something called Kind. K3D is from K3S is from Rancher. It was acquired now and by Suzy. And K3D is just running K3S on Docker. It's the same thing, but it's running on Docker. And K3S you can run like on Linux and web. Canonical has your multiple different flavors of Kubernetes. There's one more for local Kubernetes, that's micro-K3s. But they have difference, okay? They all have some kind of difference. Minikube is just one process. A lot of people still using Minikube. That's part of Kubernetes itself. But I think all those products you can have, a use for them. A use case where one will be better than another, or fits better your use case. Not here to recommend any one. I'm just show what it can be done with each one. And I think there are a couple of here, they have more ambition, like Canonical looks micro-K3s as like a edge Kubernetes. a Kubernetes that can run on the edge. And let's say, I want a lightweight to run like a Raspberry Pi somewhere. Probably those two K3S and MicroK8s will be your option. I want a lightweight where I can run my like unit testing or performance testing or integration testing inside my CI/CD. A lot of people using Kind and K3D now, but still K3S, K3D is just on Docker. Okay, and let's say I wanna get my code inside my pipeline. I wanna create this cluster, deploy my application, run some integration tests, run some performance tests, and then destroy everything in seconds, okay, in minutes. And now you can do that. And Kind came first, K3S is more recent, and MicroK8s as well. And I think Canonical has a lot of other flavors. Rancher with they have all the Kubernetes flavors, SUSE as well, and anyway, it'll be a lot of options, and it's good to have options. And with Azure, Microsoft Azure Arc now, you can get those lightweight local Kubernetes. You can even manage it using Azure Arc for Kubernetes. Azure Arc is like a control plane for a lot of things, including Kubernetes. Like you can manage a database, VMs, and you can also manage in Kubernetes anywhere. In multiple cloud providers, in on-premise, and there are a lot of. If you Google MicroK8s with Azure Arc, you can see that you can manage that from Azure Arc and of those distros. Pete, I don't know about the question, but I think we halfway. Not sure if.
Yeah, so we've got some dedicated Q&A time at the end. I'm keeping an eye on the queue for questions. Not a lot yet.
Okay, that's great. That's great. I think makes sense. That's makes sense for someone that never look on containers, as I'm trying to show something running, to see if that makes sense. And the first thing that you need to get started, you need your environment. Okay. Let's say that in that half an hour or 20 minutes before the Q&A, 25 minutes, we can show that for you to have an idea how you can get started. First, look at azureta.com and the YouTube channel, because last 2 months, we have published a lot of things with, Docker captains and like Nunu, Corsair, that's like a Windows subsystem for Linux, MVP, Pete, and if you need an MVP to talk about Windows subsystem for Linux, talk with Nunu, and he's also Docker captain, MVP, and CNCF ambassador. Okay, he's the guy, and we have a lot of videos with him there, and yeah, please have a look. And we have videos about MicroK8s, about K3D, K3S, and we're publishing a lot of more, very soon. WSL a lot, explaining how to install, including Windows Terminal. The main thing now is that you don't need to have Windows Professional anymore to get started. That means that if you have a student, just Windows, like Windows Home Edition, and you want to onboard these people to start learning Linux on Windows, today they can do it. They don't have to be working for an enterprise company, or to have all these Windows Professional license. Windows Home Edition 2004 that was released last month or 2 months ago, you can have Home Edition and you can install all those things, including Docker. Okay, that's many people don't know yet. That's the videos that we recorded explain how you do that. Then you can install the new Windows Terminal, Windows Subsystem for Linux. That's pretty much the full Linux with kernel. We have a Linux kernel being deployed with the latest version of Windows. It's a full kernel. Okay, install a kernel inside Windows now, just to run your local Linux environment. And user interface, Linux user interface on Windows is coming. by the end of the year, you're going to be able to run, UI, graphical UI on Windows, like Linux graphical UI running on Windows. That's just amazing, including GPU. GPU is already part of Windows Insider. If you're part of Windows Insider, I guess the dev version of Windows, you can even use in GPU acceleration, and you can now have nested virtualization inside that Linux inside your Windows. But it's not using VM. It's using that Linux container on Windows technology that was created 4 years ago, and it's very lightweight. Then if you want to work from the browser, you can use Cloud Shell to work with Azure. And Docker for Windows is a must. You need the local Docker for Windows, and you can even have your Kubernetes using Docker. Visual Studio Code, get your flavor here. I really enjoy Codespace, and I'm going to show that you can run local containers, local Kubernetes inside Codespace. Okay, Azure CLI, Helm package management that I was talking about. Get your account on Docker Hub or on Azure Container Registry, and pick your flavor. And let's discuss those flavors. Trying to show that working here. I'll play my I think I can stop that. Give me a second. Yeah, that's the first thing you have, okay? I was talking about Windows Terminal. That's Windows Terminal. Just install Windows Terminal, and then you can see that I already installed Windows Subsystem for Linux, and that's what I'm running here. But you can see that I have PowerShell, and I have Windows Subsystem for Linux. If you don't know, maybe I think it's a good idea to show. If you go on your Windows Store, you're going to search here Linux. You can pick your Linux and install. See, you can install the latest version of Linux. Once you install, yeah, let's go here. Once you install that and you launch, that's going to show up here. We're going to create a link for you to open that from here. Then I have a few Linux distros installed. And the nice thing on Windows that you cannot even do that on Linux is without virtual machines. You can have multiple distros, Linux distros on your Windows now. I really enjoyed that for the last few years, and I'm happy to help anyone to get started with that. And get off Windows Terminal, install that as well. Okay, Windows Terminal is complete new from scratch. That's general available. We're giving support for the companies to use that, and is a full graphical. You can have backgrounds here. You can see that now the new version, you can even rename that. I want to put, that was released last night. Okay, I want to put it here, Ubuntu. And I want to say that one, micro K, it's like put a different color here. Different color on my, and I can increase font, increase background transparency with Control Shift and scroll now without even changing settings. And that's Windows Subsystem for Linux. That's Windows Terminal. And I said that we need Docker. We need Docker Desktop. Where's my Docker Desktop? You need to install, go and run that as well. Please install Docker Desktop. When you install, you get this whale here on your close to your clock, where you can connect with your Docker Hub. You can see your local Kubernetes running here. See, Docker Desktop is your local Kubernetes. Docker Desktop creates like a local Kubernetes for you. That's your first choice. Okay. If you want to pick one, see Kubernetes running. we have Kubernetes latest version 18.3 running here. If I want to disable that, I can. And many people ask, hey, what is that running? Like, if I look at my task manager, that's where your Windows subsystem for Linux, let me put it all together here. Windows subsystem for Linux, Docker, and this all running inside that virtual machine. That's your Windows subsystem for Linux. There's a lot of memory, yes, because I'm running Kubernetes, I'm running Docker, I'm running Visual Studio Code as well. Look at this. Let me bring my Visual Studio Code up. I'm using Visual Studio Code extension called Remote. Okay, we have different ways to connect. You can use WSL now. And all those things are running on that VM. The memory is dynamic, go up and down. You can set how much memory, the maximum memory you want to set for this thing, but it's a dynamic memory. Nice. Now I have my Linux, I have my Docker, I have my Kubernetes, I have my all running inside my Ubuntu 18.04. I can pick any one that I want. First thing I want to show on local Kubernetes is the Docker one. Okay, you have this running. How can I work with that? The easy way is using Visual Studio Code. If you go here on the Docker Kubernetes extension, please install the Kubernetes extension. You're going to be able to see all the classes that you have. You can refresh. You see that I have Docker Desktop. That's the native one that they create. The nice thing with the Docker one is that they integrate that with your local, Docker. Because Docker, you have Docker, you can see Docker PS, you can see the Docker containers, list. I'm using Docker for a long time. I'm still using, the easy way Docker PS, and you can see that I have a .NET application that I was playing here to show. That's running here. Then if I do a Docker image, those are all my Docker images I have here. Okay, I have ASP.NET. I have a lot of things here. Those are the package, the image that I'm talking about. But you can see all these things. You don't need to go on the terminal and do command line anymore. You can go here on the Docker extension, the Kubernetes extensions, and you can see what's running. You can see workload, pods. You can see that I have application running there. And you can see that I use Helm to deploy this application. And see, George, I want to see that application. Can I see that application running? It's running here inside. I want to see, for example, can I follow the logs for that? Yes. It's a ASP.NET application. I can see the logs of this application. Can I, because that's running inside my cluster. That's a local cluster. Can I do a port forward? And they even tell you here, look, that's my local port and that's my container port. I just wanna see that. I just wanna see what's running in there. Then you go here, localhost port 8000. That's it. That's my application running inside my local Docker Kubernetes. That's running here on this one. And that's my ASP.NET application running. And you can manage the whole thing here. You can see anything on that application running. Let's try to, let's see. You normally don't change here, but we can go on that deployment, and you can describe like a deployment. Anything that you normally do on like command line, kubectl, that's the Kubernetes command line, you can do here. And you can see that you can have multiple, bashes, and your kube port forward still running, and my bash is running a separate shell. Means that any traffic going to port 80,000 goes inside that port 80 of this container. Not a nice thing to see, like you can describe a container. I think that's describe. See, when you describe a container, you can see everything that happened when Kubernetes create a container. They download the Docker image, okay? Because my local Kubernetes is connected with my Docker, they can pick my image from here. Then if I scroll here, I was showing, they can see that Docker image here, okay? Maybe I can increase my font a little bit. Maybe too much. And you can see that I have this container image, and my Kubernetes using Docker Desktop is able to, just get, there's a connection that Docker build. And then they're just getting this image, they create the container, and then your pod sandbox created, container image there, and everything works. Simple like that. Okay, that's Docker Desktop with Kubernetes. Then anything that you can do on Kubernetes command line, pretty much you can do here. And now you can manage, the Helm release from here as well. Helm is a command line. If you go here and let's try to clean up a little bit. And by the way, anything I'm doing here, we can do from there as well. Then if I do a Helm list, don't have Helm here maybe. Oh, I have, just spelling. You can see that I deploy, I have my Helm deployment there. And Helm is a command line. You can even uninstall from here. That's very easy to work. But George, I want to see that, what are you doing with this K3D, K3S here? That's my, let's say second option. Maybe let's go for my browser. And let's quickly go through the distros that we have. We have Docker, you have MicroK8s. Okay, MicroK8s you can install. There is an install, you can download and install on your Windows. I'm showing the Windows, but you can do for the Linux, Mac OS. And they're installing for you what they call multi-pass. If you go here, you can see multi-pass. Multi-pass is a canonical way to manage Hyper-V, or virtual machines. And they do all the magic for us. Just say the size of the VM that you want. The difference between this one and the Docker, Kubernetes is that the Kubernetes from Docker is running inside Windows Subsystem for Linux, and that one is running in a separate VM. And if you go in Hyper-V, let me show my Hyper-V here. Scaling not working well. You can see there is a MicroK8s VM. I'm not going to start now, but that's what they create. They create a VM. And the nice thing with MicroK8s is that you have all that like plugins, add-ons, and you can install all of like these things. Just saying MicroK8s, plugin, enable, and that's it. Just enable those things. And it can even enable high availability with multiple masters, and don't have to be a single node. The Docker Kubernetes is a single node. These guys are, you can have multiple masters, multiple workers, multiple control planes and multiple workers now with MicroK8s. Then it's become more than like a local, we can do like edge, deployments, and is very, very handy. So you can have a high availability micro-K3s, and they're using Snap to install. Snap is like, you know, a package manager for Linux or for Ubuntu. That's micro-K3s. Really nice. If you go back to my command line, micro-K3s, you can do micro-K3s -- help. You can see that once you install, they're going to create the VM for you, but if you want to destroy the VM and create again, you're going to see that you have, you know, commands that you can do to reinstall, and you can stop and start the cluster as well. And when you install, you can pick CPU, memory, disk, you know, size and flavors. That's very, very handy. Okay. Another one I want to show is K3D. If you go K3D, you can see command line. You can create everything. I think I have a cluster created already. If you don't know the commands, it's always do like a, you know, dash help. But see, I have a K3S deployed there, and K3D is just deploying K3S on Docker. And if I go on my VS Code, I can set a different cluster, and now I have access to my K3S. That's not working yet. K3D. Let's try to start that. See, I can stop and start my K3D cluster. And then if I do refresh, I should be able to see my cluster. There you go. I have a node now. Things are getting started. You can see that I have, you know, things deployed here. Like I even have Helm inside this thing. I have workloads. You can Kubernetes work with different namespace. If I switch here for the kube system namespace, you're probably going to be able to see the pods deployed on there, like DNS, but everything works from here. kubectl has one thing called, you know, context. If you say get context, you can see that I have the Docker desktop, I have the K3D, K3S cluster. And those are my AKS classes, okay, that I have from Microsoft. Using Docker desktop, there's a easy way to switch those contexts. If you want to switch from here, you can switch from here. So if I switch here, you're probably going to see that switching here as well. Okay, I'm back to Docker desktop. Then you can switch in and off one of those places. That's the K3D. Let's try to show Kind as well. See how much time we have. Kind is another one. You can see Kind, you have the same. If I do Kind create cluster, you can see that they're going to take a little bit longer. I think the main difference is when you go back to memory. You can see that I'm running everything at the same time. Maybe I should stop here. I can go my.
Yeah, we better tackle a couple of questions before Alessandro kicks you off stage.
Yeah, go ahead with the questions and.
Sure. So Rowan wanted to know, can I have this installed on a dedicated server and run it from VS Code?
You can, like a VM, and run from there. Yes, you can connect VS Code now, you know, on a VM, on an environment. And I think the best way to answer this question is to to open like, let's open here Codespace. Second. So I think there is way now, we not even have a VM, but you can. But Visual Studio Code now with Codespace, you can have a local environment, like isolated environment, or you can use Codespace that if you have an MSTN subscription, that you have, like a Azure credit, $200 a month, you can use those credits to create this Codespace. Means that you're not going to pay anything. You already pay for the MSTN subscription, and you just go here and you connect on your Codespace. There's two ways. You can use VS Code, or you can go and connect from the browser. You see that I have this connected here from the browser. That's my full Visual Studio Code inside the browser. And the nice thing is I have a shell here. And if I do kind, you can see that I have kind there. And if you do Docker PS, I have on the browser, I have my cluster running. I have my same Kubernetes subscription, and I have my K3S cluster running. Okay, kind is running. Okay, let's go for kind, switch here. And then that's the way I can show kind,
And
kind's
Rowan's
running. There you
wondering
go.
how hard it is to scale out multiple physical servers if you were to go that route.
Okay, when you go for physical servers on Kubernetes itself, on AKS, if the question is on AKS, it's very simple. You can create a cluster with as many nodes, I think 1,000 nodes at the moment on AKS. And here on local, if I go for go back here. If I go K3D, cluster, you can go nodes. You can go nodes. And you can see that you can create more nodes. Then I can say, let's go back there, K3D, cluster, create. Then you do server, worker, and you can tree. And just to show how quick is that, because I think it's like that. Workers think, create, cluster. There you go. No, almost. Anyway, the way that work is, let me just probably be like that. The way that you do like a create, you can see that you can create servers and you can create agents. And that's where I was make a mistake. You have to go here and you have to go agents. Then I create a new cluster with like 3 agents. Okay.
Gotcha.
And then you can do locally, and you can do, and that's the way that like Kind and K3D work with like CI/CDs. When you create, a cluster, and you can test performance and integration as well. And the nice thing, I don't know if you notice, I don't think I talked, but they create a load balancer for you on K3D.
Oh, nice. Okay, that's handy.
And then it's very handy if you do. I think there's ways to do.
Do you know anything about the licensing? Dries wanted to know if how the licensing would work if you used a Windows Server Core image.
Windows Server Core image. Not sure. I think not sure if there is any license for production. I think they give support, but I think it's open source. K3S and K3D is all about more if you want some support for production, but you can use that. You don't have to pay. And Windows license
So
itself.
he's kind of wondering about the VMs that you would deploy there. They'd require patches, etc.
Yeah, those clusters are not, meant to be long-lived. It's like you're going to create and destroy those clusters.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. You just shoot and replace them, and keep
So
your persistent data somewhere else, and your code in a pipeline, and you should be solid.
Yep. And don't forget that if he's talking about the Windows Server, you can switch to Windows containers here. That's what I was talking at the beginning. Don't forget you can switch Docker to Docker desktop for Windows and for Linux. I'll just switch here for Windows, and once you do that, it's very simple. I'm not going to create. I'm just going to show the commands. You can do it. That's it. You can run this thing here. The Windows
So
Server
Jorge, if you stop in the next 60 seconds, you maintain our perfect record today. And if not, I'll let you explain it to Alessandro.
That's fine. I just want to complement your answer about the Windows license. You definitely need license for Windows Core. It doesn't matter the version. You definitely need a license to run Windows Server Core.
Yeah, you need a license, but Windows Server come with Docker Enterprise. Okay, then if you're doing a cluster using Docker on any Azure VM and using Windows containers, and that come with Docker Enterprise license. That's something many people don't know. Then that means that is included on the Azure VM.
Hey, Dries, if that doesn't cover everything, ping out and let me know, and I'll get a question over to Jorge offline. Sounds like
thank you. And I'm going to post these slides, and you're probably going to see some files here and see how you can use that. Thank you a lot. And Alessandro,
great session, Jorge. Great session.
George, if you want to stay, more than welcome. Actually, it'll be way better if you stay on the call. How good?
Okay, I'm happy to make you some questions if you want. Not frequent.
All right, let's see here.
Let me.
So I'm going to take over and just show a picture of our next presenter here. So Jorge, that's another one of those sessions that just kind of broke my brain. I'll never use Minikube again now. You've done it.
No problem. Thanks for the invite, and really appreciate that conference. Very important to share content.